Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. On va commencer maintenant. Je m'appelle Roland Paris, je suis le directeur de l'École supérieure d'affaires publiques et internationales, ici à l'Université d'Ottawa. Et il me fait grand plaisir de vous souhaiter tous et toutes la bienvenue à cette discussion avec la ministre des Affaires étrangères, Anita Anand, à l'occasion de ce sombre 4e anniversaire de l'invasion à grande échelle de l'Ukraine par la Russie. Et merci à vous, Madame la Ministre, de votre présence sur notre campus de nouveau et pour discuter de cet important sujet. Let me just say a quick word about our format. In a few moments, I'll invite Minister Anand to deliver some remarks. Then I'll have a chance to converse with her on this occasion of the 4th anniversary of the full-scale invasion. Then we will open the session up for questions from the audience, specifically from students. So if you have questions, start thinking about them right now. And it is our practice to begin all of our public events with an Indigenous affirmation in which we pay respect to the Algonquin people, who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded, and we pay respect to all Indigenous people from nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. Et maintenant, pour présenter notre invité d'honneur, j'ai le plaisir de convier sur scène la rectrice et vice-chancelière de l'Université d'Ottawa, the one and only Marie-Eve Sylvestre.
Thank you, Roland. Madame la Ministre, a special welcome to representatives from the Embassy of Ukraine, Ambassador Andrei Plakotniuk, Minister-Counselor and Head of the Political Section Maxim Maniuk, Counselor Tetiana Verenko, and First Secretary Roman Strachimsky. Chers collègues, étudiantes et étudiants, Kwe, bonjour, good afternoon. C'est un immense plaisir de me joindre à vous aujourd'hui pour cette conversation sur l'un des plus grands enjeux géopolitiques de l'heure. Je suis particulièrement fière d'accueillir la ministre Anand sur notre campus pour la 2e fois en 1 mois. Alors, Madame la ministre était venue un peu plus tôt à l'Université d'Ottawa pour un symposium sur l'Arctique, donc il y a quelques semaines, entourée de nos plus grands chercheurs en la matière, des ambassadeurs des pays nordiques, des leaders autochtones et des premiers ministres des territoires dans le Nord canadien. Alors, Madame la ministre, sachez que vous êtes toujours la bienvenue chez nous, vous venez quand vous voulez. 4 ans après l'invasion à grande échelle de l'Ukraine par la Russie, nous assistons à une guerre d'usure dévastatrice. Les conséquences humaines, économiques et géopolitiques continuent de s'accumuler. Nous assistons aussi à une remise en question des principes de souveraineté, d'intégrité territoriale et de primauté du droit. La démocratie en prend un coup. Les alliances se redéfinissent. Les certitudes vacillent. As Prime Minister Carney so powerfully reminded us in his recent address in Davos, we are experiencing a rupture, not a transition. In this context, Canada must reflect on its place in the world and how it will position itself in the face of challenges that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. For us at the University of Ottawa, these are not abstract concepts. For centuries, universities have stood as cosmopolitan spaces of discussion, dialogue, and the creation of knowledge. We are not only institutions where people come to acquire an education before they pursue careers in diplomacy, politics, business, or law. We are places where they learn to become engaged and thoughtful citizens. Citizens equipped to understand the complexity of this world, to navigate the uncertainty, and to contribute meaningfully to society. And as Canada's only bilingual research-intensive university located in the heart of the national capital of a G7 country, the University of Ottawa is ideally positioned to lead in these turbulent times. Madame la ministre, votre présence témoigne aujourd'hui de l'importance du dialogue entre le monde universitaire et les leaders politiques. Merci d'avoir choisi de tenir cet important dialogue chez nous et merci à notre collègue Roland Paris d'avoir accepté d'agir comme modérateur. Bonne discussion.
Merci beaucoup, Marie-Eve, and I'm sure you're all eager to hear from our honored guest. Let me just very, very briefly introduce her because she has a long biography, but I'll make it brief with your permission. Minister Anand has been Minister of Foreign Affairs since last May. She was first elected to the House of Commons as a Member of Parliament from Oakville East in 2019. And since then, she has held several key cabinet roles, including Minister of National Defense, quite relevant to our discussion here today, President of the Treasury Board, Minister of Transport, and Minister of Innovation, Science, and Industry. Most importantly, she used to be a law professor, having held positions at Western Queen's and the University of Toronto. So please join me in welcoming Canada's Foreign Minister, Anita Anand, to the stage, back to the university.
Well, thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. C'est toujours un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous et surtout aujourd'hui, l'occasion solennelle de l'invasion injustifiable de l'Ukraine par la Russie en 2022. Ambassador, consular officials, students, and professors, it is just wonderful to see you all here today, but the occasion that we are commemorating is indeed a very solemn one and one that we must take seriously. Et aujourd'hui, je voudrais faire deux choses. Premièrement, je voudrais commencer par exprimer les affaires étrangères et la politique de nos affaires étrangères vers l'Ukraine. Et deuxièmement, je voudrais discuter la position stratégique de la Russie et aussi de l'Ukraine dans la guerre à ce moment-là. Est-ce qu'on va voir le paix? Peut-être nous pouvons le discuter dans le Q&A. Donc, je voudrais commencer par une réflexion personnelle. So, as Director Paris mentioned, I was the Minister of National Defense, and I was in that position at the time of the further illegal invasion in February 2022. And building up to February 24th, including at the end of 2021, I found myself newly appointed in defense and almost daily in a secret room or SCIF, as they're referred to discuss the emerging intelligence about the buildup of Russian weaponry and arsenal at the Russia-Ukraine border on the east of the Donbass, as well as north in the Belarusian territory. And it was clear that the Russian position, even at that time, prior to February 24th, 2022, was accelerating in terms of the munitions and the precipitous behavior that they were building at these borders. And so in the middle of the night on February 24th, 2022, when I received a call from the Chief of Defense Staff, Wayne Eyre, at the time, it was not a surprise that the further invasion was occurring. The intelligence had showed that indeed the engines were running on the Russian plains that day. And it was clear to us well before that date that we were going to need to be ready to assist Ukraine in whatever way possible. Donc ça c'est le premier point aujourd'hui pour moi. Et nous étions ici et nous sommes ici comme partenaires avec l'Ukraine dans le court et le moyen terme et surtout dans le long terme. Et c'était le cas en 2022-2021 aussi. Bien sûr, en 2015, in 2015, we launched Operation Unifier. Operation Unifier, just raise your hands if you have heard of Operation Unifier. Okay, so this is a fantastic example of a government policy, and there's so many that Canadians don't hear about. But Operation Unifiers actually led to the training of 47,000 members of the Ukrainian armed forces, and it was launched in 2015. So as I was saying, because we knew that we needed to be there for Ukraine, even before February 24th, 2022, we were putting in motion government policy in foreign affairs and defense. And we actually renewed Operation Unifier in January of 2022, and I see the ambassador nodding his head because he would remember that. Today, we announced a further renewal of Operation Unifier and another $2 billion from the Government of Canada, bringing the total contributed to approximately $25 billion over the last 4 years. And the reason that we believe strongly in this approach in our foreign policy and in our defense policy is that the concepts, the reality of territorial integrity, sovereignty, the rule of law, the rules-based international order, those fundamental principles that have kept us all safe since the end of the Second World War are right now being tested on the battlefield in Ukraine. And Ukrainians are fighting for their sovereignty, pour leur souveraineté, mais aussi pour les règles internationales importantes. C'est un moment de pivot. It's a pivotal moment in our country's history, but also in the history of Ukraine and Europe as we support the rules-based international order and the concept of territorial integrity and sovereignty. Now, sometimes it is very difficult to make tangible these concepts. But to be clear, the idea of territorial integrity rests on a map. And if we had a screen here with a map on it of Ukraine, I would say look at the border of Ukraine that has been in existence, and this is the border that we are referring to when we say that the decisions about Ukraine's geography, the decisions about Ukraine's territorial integrity are not decisions for Russia or Vladimir Putin to make. Those are decisions for Vladimir Zelensky and the Ukrainian government to make. It is their future. It is their territorial integrity. It is their sovereignty which is at issue, and that is why it is their decision to make, period. And so that's kind of been the gist of our foreign policy. We are participating in the coalition of the willing. We are bringing home Ukrainian children as fast as we can, those who have been abducted and taken and indoctrinated by Russia. And we are levying sanctions, 4,000 sanctions before today, and another 174 new sanctions that I announced this morning. We are also addressing, I'm sure you've heard about the very difficult toll that Russian violence and killing has had on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Well, we are lowering the price cap on Russian crude oil from $47.60 US to $44.10 a barrel. We are leading on sanctions with sanctions on the shadow fleet. And we are amongst countries that are committed to Ukraine's longevity. We, Canada, is a leader. And we will continue to lead in this space for the very reasons that I outlined, the principles upon which the rules-based international order is founded. Now I want to turn for a moment to just talk a little bit about the strategy. C'est difficile d'exprimer en total la stratégie parce qu'il n'y a pas une démocratie dans la Russie. C'est pas possible de savoir en total le stratégie de Vladimir Poutine. Mais je voudrais mentionner quelques points. First, one that I've mentioned. Putin cannot redraw maps at will. Geography is not a matter that dictators can decide. The geographical boundaries of Ukraine represent their territorial integrity, and Canada stands for that principle and for Ukraine in this moment. That's a point I've made. You understand that. Let's go to point two. Point two is that I remember also, just after the further invasion, Vladimir Putin predicted that Kyiv would fall in 3 days. Okay, so by February 27th, 28th. After a week, at the most, we started to see tanks, Russian tanks, broken down on the highway north of Kyiv, and Kyiv did not fall. In fact, Kyiv is still standing, despite the fact that inhabitants of the capital city go for extended periods of time without electricity, without water, because of the impact, unjustifiable and illegal impact on their energy infrastructure. So I will say that we are here 4 years later, and the capital city and the country of Ukraine is still standing. And that is a testament to the resilience of the Ukrainian people on and off the battlefield, the families, the teachers, the business leaders, the governmental leaders, the armed forces, and all of the allies who stand strongly with Ukraine, including the members of the Coalition of the Willing. The key battleground right now is obviously in the Donbass. But let's be clear, Russians were killing Ukrainian soldiers even before February 22 in the Donbass. And the work that we need to do now is to ensure that Ukraine is equipped to fight and win this war. And so hopefully in our Q&A we can talk about particular capabilities that Ukraine is looking for and needs to win this war, including air defense systems. The final point I want to make before we go to the Q&A is a fundamental point, and let's call this point number 3. Point number 3 is that you cannot understand Russian strategy in Ukraine without also understanding the economic toll that this war is having on Russia. We've talked about the toll on Ukraine, but I think, and we are burdened by lack of transparency from in terms of information, but there are estimates, including from CSIS, that 35,000 Russian soldiers per month are being killed on the battlefield. And since 2022, 1.2 million people. This is more losses than any major power since World War II. And the human toll and the human suffering for families, and as a mom of 4 myself, I can only imagine how hard it is for the families who are experiencing the loss of loved ones on either side of the legitimate border. But there is another point to make. Russia can only survive this current war of attrition if it is economically viable for it to do so. And right now, that is a key question. And Russia is looking for allies. Russia is looking for partners over and above North Korea. They need to build international partnerships, and this is very difficult for them. So it is the human toll, it is also the economic toll and the lack of international partnerships that is a large geostrategic challenge for Russia at this moment in time. And as I always say, and certainly in talking about current policy domestically, you cannot understand questions of defense unless you also understand economic implications of investments in defense. And hopefully in the Q&A, we will talk about Canada's position on those questions. But I will say that Russia has a dilemma now. There is a peace plan on the table. And what I hear from Ukrainian counterparts, including Minister Sybiha, my foreign minister counterpart in Ukraine, and I was in a meeting with President Zelensky just 10 days ago, that the West, and in particular NATO allies, need to continue to support Ukraine in matters relating to air defense capabilities, counter-drone defenses, interceptor missiles, and energy infrastructure. Assuming that we can support Ukraine on these pillars, the question then becomes, can Russia survive? Because the attrition that Russia has experienced, the economic degradation that they have experienced, the lack of international partnerships that they are experiencing are making the prospect of a Russian victory circumspect. And with that, I will invite Q&A with Roland Paris. Thank you. Thank you very much.
If you don't mind taking a seat, I take a seat. And there's a microphone there, which you'll have to hold. Thank you. Testing. Thanks so much for those remarks. And I'd love to pick up where you left off and to ask you both about the state, your assessment of the state of the conflict right now, but also a little bit about the peace negotiations. You mentioned the 30 to 35,000 estimated Russian deaths per month, which is roughly equivalent to what they're recruiting. So, they're really strained in terms of their recruitment model. Ukraine, of course, is experiencing tremendous strain as well. Both countries economically strained. What is your assessment of the current state of the conflict? Would you call it a stalemate? Is there a trajectory? Does Russia, in your view, currently have the upper hand? Is Ukraine in a stronger position now than it was a year ago? How would you frame that?
Well, that is the key question, really, because as I indicated, the fighting in the Donbass has not significantly led to Russian victories over the course of 4 years. So we are all very concerned that this war has lasted 4 years, on the one hand. On the other hand, Ukrainian armed forces members are fighting the battle of their lives, and they are doing it with determination and motivation and staying power. And that is what you are seeing on the front lines right now. I should add that at the same time that this fighting is going on, there is a peace process that is being negotiated. And Russian officials spend and have spent significant time in Florida trying to negotiate their way to peace. And what we are seeing now is that the block to achieving peace is not with Ukraine. It's actually on the Russian side. And historically, there had been naysayers indicating that Ukraine didn't want peace. That is not true. President Zelensky himself has said numerous times he wants to work with the United States. Ukraine wants peace. And at the same time, Ukraine must have its territorial integrity and sovereignty intact, which is a reasonable position to take.
Ben justement, si je peux poser une question sur ces négociations actuelles, il y a bien évidemment des questions non résolues, notamment la question des territoires et aussi des garanties de sécurité. Vous avez affirmé que tout accord devait être, et je cite, juste, équitable et viable. Qu'est-ce que cela veut dire concrètement pour vous et pour le gouvernement du Canada?
Après la guerre?
Le contenu d'un accord de paix.
Mais aussi, ça c'est une question extrêmement significative parce que tout le monde ici est là, veut avoir une forme de paix. Et la question maintenant est, oui, premièrement, est-ce que ça c'est possible? Mais deuxièmement, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire pour les troupes, pour les forces ukrainiennes après la guerre? Et nous avons déjà affirmé que nous allons être là avec les forces ukrainiennes, avec les affirmations de sécuritaires sur le terrain. Mais qu'est-ce que ça veut dire pratiquement? Est-ce qu'il y a des plans maintenant pour les security guarantees? Ça, c'est la question qu'on débat entre nous et on va avoir les plans en place pour l'Ukraine avec nos alliés, avec nos partenaires. Donc, c'est complexe. Il y a plusieurs choses qui se passent en même temps. Premièrement, les investissements, l'argent nécessaire. Deuxièmement, les capacités nécessaires pour gagner la guerre. Troisièmement, le travail avec nos alliés de l'OTAN. Ça, c'est nécessaire. Je pense que vous avez entendu qu'il y a quelque chose qui s'appelle Pearl Packages. Les paquets de Pearl comme ça, ça veut dire les achètes des États-Unis. On doit acheter les capacités américaines sur les programmes de Pearl. Donc, est-ce qu'il y a quelque chose d'autre que nous pouvons faire? Ça, c'est la question toujours. Donc, ça, c'est la raison pour laquelle nous sommes là avec les enfants ukrainiens. Nous sommes là pour l'énergie. Nous sommes là avec les sanctions, avec le 25 milliards de dollars. Donc, les affaires étrangères, notre politique, c'est très complexe maintenant parce que la situation est très complexe aussi.
Thank you for making the announcements today, by the way. And there's no question Canada has been an incredibly strong supporter of Ukraine. And I see the representatives from the Ukrainian embassy nodding their heads. And it's hard to imagine a more worthy cause to support than the courageous defense of Ukraine by Ukrainians. When you talk about security guarantees, I get it that these things, that everything is in motion. The war is still on, the negotiations are happening. At the same time, these conversations are happening, and you have previously said that any security guarantees need to be strong and credible, and that as recently as your meeting with President Zelensky in Munich, that Canada is ready to contribute to multilateral security guarantees in Ukraine. So what kinds of guarantees are you considering? And is there any chance we'll see Canadian combat troops on the ground in Ukraine?
As I said, the planning relating to security guarantees is in motion and are being led by these security guarantees and that planning being led by Minister McGuinty from a Canadian perspective, as well as the Chief of Defence Staff, remembering that Canada is well recognized because of the contributions relating to Operation Unifier, the expertise on the ground, the planning center at Wiesbaden. There are Canadians in particular who are leading planning and advice as a general matter. In terms of after the war and what we will see on the ground, that is a continued conversation and exercise that is occurring. And it is impossible right now to lay a plan out on the table given that the situation on the ground is so volatile. And at the end of the day, we and Ukraine is searching for a peaceful resolution within its territorial boundaries. And that is the frame in which we're working.
J'aimerais vous poser une question sur la politique étrangère de façon plus générale. Vous avez indiqué que le gouvernement va publier une stratégie de politique étrangère après la diffusion d'une stratégie de sécurité nationale. Et comme vous le savez bien, le gouvernement est en train de réinvestir de façon importante dans les forces armées canadiennes. C'est moins le cas pour notre service diplomatique, alors même que le monde devient de plus en plus complexe et instable. Alors, est-ce qu'on peut s'attendre à un renforcement des instruments de notre politique étrangère au-delà de la dimension militaire?
Mais vous voulez avoir la politique de nos affaires étrangères avant de publier le document. Je comprends bien. Oui, ça c'est la question que nous continuons d'examiner. Comment est-ce qu'on peut avoir une consolidation, une relation entre la stratégie de la défense nationale à l'un côté et à l'autre côté nos affaires étrangères. Mais je voudrais mentionner que c'est difficile, à mon avis, dans ce moment ici de nos affaires étrangères, de faire le job sans expérience dans la défense nationale. À cause grâce à nos obligations de l'OTAN et d'autres organisations multilatérales, ce sont des matières quelquefois sur la défense et aussi la sécurité. Donc, on a besoin d'une connaissance peut-être de la défense en total. Donc, je suis contente d'être quelqu'un qui peut le faire et aussi d'avoir une stratégie avec nos affaires étrangères.
Okay. Maybe I'll just ask one more question for our discussion, and then I'm going to turn to the audience. So if you do have questions, and I especially would encourage those students of mine in first year War and Peace class, where we are now studying Ukraine, to come up with a question. Please, you can start making your way to the two standing mics that are on either side of the room. But the last question relates to the situation in Iran, which is currently in the news. As you know, the United States has dramatically increased its military presence in the region, including with the second aircraft carrier strike group. And President Trump has been publicly hinting about attacking Iran, although, you know, media reports suggest that he has yet to decide whether to go ahead and what form such an attack could take. So the question is, if the United States were to carry out military strikes in Iran, what would Canada's position be?
Can I begin this answer by telling you what Canada's position is?
Please.
I think the key is always to speak in the present moment. And in the present moment, Canada is deeply disturbed with the violence and violation of human rights that are being exacted upon innocent civilians, including women and children, in the state of Iran, period. It is absolutely reprehensible that peaceful protests have led to thousands of people being killed on the ground in Iran as a normal occurrence. That is not normal. That is not acceptable, and it is not within Canadian government policy to turn a blind eye to such egregious violations of human rights, full stop. And I agree. And as a result, the focus of our foreign policy is on the humanitarian question, on the individuals who are suffering as a result of a regime which we have declared 18 months ago to be a terrorist entity under Canadian law. The EU declared the IRGC to be a terrorist entity a few weeks ago. Canada did that 18 months ago. Why? Because we knew that the violations of human rights that had been occurring needed to be called out domestically and internationally. Your question about what Canadian foreign policy might be if the United States launches an attack is one that I simply cannot answer because we have not seen the actual eventuality that you're describing occur. I work in real time. I work with facts on the ground. What is the reality now? And I gave an example of that earlier when I said we saw Russian planes with their engines on at the eastern border of Ukraine, and we were affecting Canadian government policy. And so we will make sure that we have a comprehensive foreign policy approach. It will always be focused on the humanitarian issue at play. And as I said, the violations which are egregious of human rights on the ground in Iran.
Thank you. On va passer maintenant à la période de questions du public. If I can just remind you of our house rules. The rules are, number one, please identify yourself. Number two, please ask a question. So that's something with a question mark at the end. No speeches, please. And three, please keep it as short as you can so that we can hear from as many people as possible. With your permission, I'm going to take two at a time, and that'll help us to get more in the time we have remaining. We'll start over at this microphone, please.
Does that work?
Yep.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Minister Anand, for your remarks. Professor Anand, I would like to ask an application-based question, if you don't mind. So, as you mentioned, there were tensions rising the Ukrainian and Russian border before the invasion took place. And that's not too unsimilar to what we're seeing, unfortunately, with our southern neighbor here, with tensions rising every day, especially after Prime Minister Carney's remark in Davos, after which President Trump took the liberty to call our Prime Minister governor again and threaten the territory and sovereignty of our country. My question is, what policies, what tangible policies and actions has the federal government taken, and what preparations have we made in order to repel a potential threat, which is no longer quite potential, unfortunately?
And we'll take one more question. Over here, please.
Yep. Can you hear me? All right. So thank you very much for your time, Minister. My question has to do with political support. How we're 4 years into the war, there are some people who question why we should continue supporting Ukraine. What can we tell to the average Canadian? What can we tell them to show that it is necessary for us to continue supporting an important ally like Ukraine?
You have smart students. So on the first question about the United States and our bilateral relationship, that relationship is one that spans a number of areas: economic, security, people-to-people ties. And we are very much looking forward to a review of the CUSMA the free trade agreement that has indeed been in place since 2018. At the same time, our strategy is to build the domestic economy here at home by decreasing internal barriers to trade, by implementing the infrastructure investments to 10 national projects, by ensuring that the $80 billion that we are spending on national defense includes dual-use infrastructure, including in the North in conjunction with Indigenous peoples. That's at home. And you asked for the response. There's also a response internationally. And our response internationally is that we need to diversify our trade relationships. In fact, there's so much discussion about trade diversification that it does require more in terms of an explanation. What we mean by trade diversification is that businesses in Canada need to have avenues to trade outside of the Canada-US relationship. In the last 6 months, over 4 continents, we have put in place 12 trade agreements, including securing foreign direct investment from the UAE to the tune of $71 billion. So in short, our response is to build the domestic economy and diversify trade relationships while ensuring that we look forward to the review of the CUSMA, which is set for 2026. Thank you. In terms of the Ukraine response and the feeling domestically, I speak with Ukrainians and the broader Canadian public often, and I believe that the support for Ukraine rests on the principles that I was outlining in my remarks, that if we value democratic government, if we value the concept of territorial integrity, if we value state sovereignty, then we see Ukraine's fight as part of a broader fight in support of those principles. There are over 1 million Ukrainian Canadians in this country. Yet we see Ukrainian flags on bumper stickers and on the front doorsteps of Canadians, whether they are Ukrainians or not. We see towns and cities across this great country opening their doors to Ukrainian immigrants, to families who need help, in support of the broader principle that this war launched by Russia is illegal, it's unjustifiable, and it's contrary to international law.
We're going to thank you for your questions. We're going to go to the next question over here. Tell us at least what program you're in and then ask your question, please.
Hello, hello. My name is Mahmoud Ibrahim. Good to see you again. I believe we met in Hamilton for the first time. So my name is Mahmoud Ibrahim. I'm finishing my final semester here at U Ottawa in the Poli-Sci and Public Administration. And so I'm going to take this question about Ukraine from the African context. I find it very surprising that African countries have either abstained or have voted for Russia in the Ukrainian war. You know, I'm from Eritrea. Eritrea, unfortunately, has been the only country outside like Belarus who's like voted yes for Russia. I promise I don't represent Eritrean government. But my question is essentially, because I view the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a form of Russian colonialization. And given the colonialization struggle with Africa, if you've had conversations with African leaders or ambassadors, what was their reasons to be abstaining or being pro-Russia? And because we have a unique diaspora here, what do you think, or what do you think we have in terms of tools into pushing them in the needle and showing them that, like, this is colonialization, you've gone through this struggle, solidarity, etc.? Thank you.
We're just going to take one more question. That was a great question. Over here, please.
Hi, I'm Aisha.
Walk right up to the microphone so that we can hear
I'm
you.
Aisha. I'm in conflict studies and human rights, following your course. I'm wondering, what does advocacy look for Canadian government within the war? Like, how are Canadians helping?
Okay, so the question on Africa and African countries generally is superb. It's superb because it's understudied. And if you're writing a paper or you're thinking about writing any papers in your program, this is a perfect area I would humbly advise that we could use more deep thinking on. And in particular, Africa is not a country. There are separate regional groupings along economic and defense and security lines in Africa. And some countries are, from a colonial perspective, tied to current historical relationships, and some are not. And so I think that all of that needs to be unpacked when we answer, or when I answer, or anyone answers a question like this. The ultimate question that you were asking was, am I hearing about Ukraine from African countries? And the conversations that I have had, including at the G20 with a number of African leaders or leaders of African countries there, has not been focused on Ukraine, frankly. It has been focused on regional security and economic interests, especially in the wake of a very distressed trading environment, a very distressed and reorganized world trading order, in which countries around the world are trying to find their footing. And so it is in my conversations with many African countries, including the countries I spoke with at the G20. So when you write your paper, please send it to me, but also think about the economic implications of war regionally in Africa, but also wars outside of that continent, including in Europe, where that particular war is very destabilizing. And I would say, if my last point would be, I haven't talked about the insecurity of global food supply chains. And that is not a military fact. That is a human fact. It's an economic fact, but largely results from war. If you think about in the Ukraine context, the fact that Ukraine is one of the world's largest producers of grain, and the fact that those supply chains have been intercepted and to some extent unwound, has impacted the global economy in ways that are unfathomable. And when I say global economy, I always like to bring it back to families. Food prices are higher today, and the causes of high food prices are multifactorial. But one of those causes is exacerbated global food supply chains. So send me your paper. Thank you.
I'm in the 1834 Global Fellowship, so I'll use those contacts. I got you.
On advocacy,
Canadian advocacy.
one thing I have learned in government, and I've been in government just for 6 years, and before that I was a law professor, as Roland mentioned, the beauty of the Canadian democracy is that advocacy matters. And one of the reasons I ran for public office, and many people told me that a racialized woman would not get elected in Oakville, Ontario as a member of parliament, is that our democracy actually allows us to try, to put our name forward, to be advocates, whether it is in running for public office or writing articles or doing social media posts or speaking with your colleagues here at university and trying to launch petitions or any other type of advocacy. This is the beauty of Canada. We have this democracy which is imperfect, but allows us the ability to express ourselves. And that right is protected in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Advocacy has potential, you have potential, and this country has potential.
Thank you. Next round of questions, we'll start on this side. I'm going to have to ask everybody to keep your questions as brief as possible so that we can get through at least a couple more. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Anand. I am a student finishing my last semester of law school here at the U Ottawa in the common law program. So as a Ukrainian Canadian, I believe it's very important, Canada's ongoing commitment. But my question is, given the lack of performance on the U.S. side in peace negotiations, can we expect Canada to take on a bigger role in the peace negotiations?
Thank you. Nice and brief. Go ahead over here, please.
Thank you, Minister Anand, for being here today. My name is Salim. I am a common law student here at the University of Ottawa. Canada has distinguished itself through its defense support for Ukraine. But defense is not only about military assistance, it is also about protecting people, including those who have been displaced and resettled because of war. As a member of the Syrian refugee diaspora, I understand how critical that support is. What more will Canada do to support Ukrainian refugees, both those who have come to Canada and those who remain displaced across Europe?
So, in answer to the first question, the work of a diplomat is always to strive towards objectives like you mentioned in your question, including in the area of peace for Ukraine. And recently, when I was at the Munich Security Conference, and I was meeting with Minister Sabiha, I was representing Canada because the Prime Minister was in Tumbler Ridge and couldn't make it to the Munich Security Conference, representing him at the leaders' table in discussing the path to peace with other leaders. That is the very question. It's not, however, just about Canada's leadership. Canada is a cooperative, multilateral country, meaning that we will always take the route of striving for peace in conjunction with other like-minded countries. I'm sure you've discussed the Prime Minister's Davos speech in at least one of your classes. And what the Prime Minister was saying in the Davos speech is that in this moment of volatile geopolitical change, Canada will be a beacon for peace, for equitable solutions, for justice and support of international law, and we will do that with like-minded countries. And so on the Ukraine front, that is with the Coalition of the Willing, which if you take the total GDP of members of the Coalition of the Willing, it is extremely significant. And so that's where you're going to see us push in terms of like-minded countries, coalitions where we are striving and pushing, not only for peace, but for support to achieve peace, including in supporting Ukraine with the military, economic, and humanitarian needs that it has now and in the future. What was that second? Refugees. So since the beginning of the further invasion in 2022, we have put it on the table various pathways for Ukrainians to come to Canada, including through specific visa permits, which allowed Ukrainians fleeing Ukraine, usually through Poland or Germany, to be able to come to Canada, and for a certain period of time, there was also a stipend that was available for Ukrainians who had fled. Many of these people are women and children who, and some of them gave birth to their children in Canada. And I was privileged to be able to see some of these mothers and hold some of their children. All that to say that we are always looking to see how we can best support from immigration and refugee stance, and we'll keep working on those types of initiatives.
I am so sorry to the people who are still in line, but we are out of time because the minister has to get to the House of Commons. So I am just going to take this opportunity to thank you again, and to thank the ambassador from Ukraine and other representatives from the Ukraine embassy, and especially to you, Minister, for it's an honor to be able to host you here today on this important anniversary. And thank you for helping to remind us of why Ukraine matters and supporting Ukraine matters, and that it's not just about Ukraine, it's also about those principles you mentioned, principles like sovereignty and territorial integrity and the rule of law, which are Canadian principles that are at stake here. So, au nom de l'Université d'Ottawa et de notre école, je vous remercie, Madame la Ministre, encore une fois, d'avoir pris le temps d'échanger avec nous, avec nos étudiants sur un sujet d'une telle importance. Merci, merci à tous et bonne fin de journée.